Hey there folks, it's Chris here from Tips for Lawyers and welcome to another little discussion that we're going to have this time about legal drafting, and in particular why your legal drafting is not necessarily improving at the rate you might like. Now, I think it's reasonable to say that between starting law school and finishing legal practice, everyone trends upwards to a degree in their legal drafting. Some people plateau a little bit earlier than others in terms of the quality of their writing, and others get better and better and better. They refine and they become excellent draftspeople, and it is a joy to read the things that they send you, even if they're your opponent in litigation, and that's very frustrating that they write so well. So, what is it that prevents you from continuing that trend upwards? And I think a good place to start is this. You think you're already a good writer. Now, in a sense, you may well be a good writer. In another sense, when compared to your potential, you're probably not there yet. If you are a young lawyer or an aspiring lawyer, I'm fairly sure that you have a relatively high opinion of yourself and your ability to use words. The number of people that get into law because I was good at debating is distressingly high, and whatever reason, that seems to be a very common one. But just because you did well at English, just because even through law school, if you have graduated, you wrote well for the purposes of law school, or at the very least you weren't criticized at law school for your writing, does not mean you've come out of law school with the ability to produce a document that is good for legal practice. Why do I say that? I say that because law school is very, very different writing style to what you should be producing in legal practice, more often than not. Some people literally stay in academic law school speak for the entirety of their career. They believe themselves to be brilliant. Other people read their work and cry a little bit because it's just so difficult to read as a human being. So the first step, as is often the case, is acknowledging that you have a problem and that problem is fairly easily solvable, but go in with a dose of humility, okay? Someone who has been writing for 30 years in a legal context will probably have some tips that you can take on board if you are a first-year lawyer, and I think that's worth bearing in mind. Sometimes those tips might be terrible, but other times they might be useful. Accept that you can get better, and we can go from there. The second thing that tends to happen is we don't give ourselves time, or we don't have time to actually contemplate how to get better at the things we're producing. So if you're in practice in particular, you've managed to find a job, you've got a graduate job or a young lawyer job somewhere, and you are working pretty hard, okay? I think we can all accept that. By and large, young lawyers work pretty hard. The result is taking the time to reflect upon how something you produced in draft was changed before it was sent out the door is actually a little challenging, and you may not necessarily think that you have the time or opportunity to do that. However, to the extent that you can get it, it's valuable. It's valuable for a number of reasons. One, your bosses may not necessarily give you the feedback directly. They might not. Bosses are different. I know young lawyers all seem to say they want more feedback, but you are getting feedback or an opportunity for feedback because all you need to do is compare the draft you wrote to what went out the door. Lo and behold, feedback, and you didn't need to go and knock on your partner's door and risk the fact that they were too busy to offer you that kind of support at that time. That is available feedback for you. If you're not getting it verbally, if you're not getting that sort of instruction, then it can be useful to do a little bit of an audit yourself. I'm not saying you need to read every document, every change, take hours and hours all the time, because you are busy and you do have the right to, at some point in the day, put your pens down without necessarily focusing on your career. However, it's an opportunity for growth and it's worth bearing in mind. How are things settled? What do the track changes reveal? Are they stylistic? Are they content driven? More often than not, after a certain time, the things that are going to get changed in your documents that you're producing are not legal things. Sometimes they will be, because we've all got things to learn, but as often as not, they're going to be style related or tone related, or why did you say this, or does this really achieve the purpose, or I don't think this is phrased well. And those are opportunities to reflect. Do I agree? Do I disagree? What's with all the Latin? What are you on about? That sort of stuff. You don't need to necessarily agree with every piece of feedback you get, but it's useful to get it, take it on board, and as you develop your own writing styles, you become more senior, then you will be able to take those things and develop your own tone and style with your communication. So that's number 2. Number 3 is a little bit related, and that is this. You only read legal things. And so your writing style that you came out of law school, as I said before, is fairly academic, okay? What you've become accustomed to producing during law school is basically a referenced academic scholarly paper. And this is not necessarily an ideal style for many elements of legal practice as we find them in the real world. So if you are only reading cases, reading legislation, reading things written by other lawyers, writing things yourself, reading feedback from your partners, and your entire world is lawyers and things that lawyers write, or judges' opinions, or really academic journal articles, or that sort of stuff, you're going to have a slightly skewed view of how people communicate when it comes to normal communication with your clients. And the reason we know that to be true is because when you're speaking with someone, that sometimes bears little, if any, resemblance to how you communicate with them when you pick up a pen or start typing on a keyboard. So why would that be the case? If you're sending an email to a client and you would have delivered an advice in a particular way verbally, but then as soon as you pick up the email, you're like, we refer to the aforementioned matter, and then you have 32 definitions that don't necessarily have to be there, and then you write 16 pages of stuff, most of which the client already knew or told you in the first place. Is that necessary? That's really the question we need to ask. Is that useful, or is it the case that you've become a little myopic in your view of how people communicate? Read more broadly. I'm not saying you need to read a bunch of science, fantasy, or fiction or whatever, but just read more broadly. Read different books about communication and writing styles. Read different non-fiction books as they might be produced. Read different styles of writing. Watch how people are communicating. And this is worth it as well, and it harkens back to the point we said before, which is look at how the senior lawyers are communicating as well. Some of them will be adopting a very technical academic style because they never changed. Some of them will be adopting a very different style. Which one are you aiming for? Which one do you prefer? Do you like sounding like a lawyer? It's interesting, a lot of the time we spend when we're writing things is actually making them sound less like a lawyer, because it tends not necessarily to build trust as much as sounding like someone's friendly advisor who doesn't speak like they wear a top hat and wear a bow tie every day. So look outside the law is that point. And the last point we're going to make in this little opportunity for review is giving yourself the time, if you can, to actually produce a better piece of writing. I think one of the reasons our writing doesn't improve is because when we're given a task, we have this sense of urgency, and sometimes it is urgent, but often we have this sense of urgency and we sit down and we start writing, we produce the thing, and then we're done, and then we hand it off, and then we've got the next thing, and then we produce that, and then we hand that off, and then we're done, and then we just make the changes, and we never actually sit down before we start writing and give ourselves the opportunity to go, how am I going to make this an excellent piece of work? How is this going to be really good in terms of achieving its goals, being well directed to the people who are receiving it, being in the right tone, and being as brief as is necessary to achieve the purpose for which we are writing it? These are good questions to sit and ask, but I find a lot of people just start. The result is often something that lacks cohesion, it lacks structure, it doesn't necessarily canvass the points it needs to, and it regularly canvasses points that it doesn't need to, that could be removed but never are, because you're in such a hurry to produce a thing that what you have done is just sat down and typed. If you can give yourself a few minutes to plan before you sit down, jot down a little structure, think through it. What is it for? What am I trying to achieve? What is the brief that I've been given? And how can I achieve that succinctly and efficiently? You will find that sometimes that will actually make your production phase faster, and it will certainly result in a better piece of work. We can talk a bit more about how to effectively plan a piece of writing in another time if anyone wants to do that, but for now, those are my 4 areas where Sometimes there are barriers to you growing in terms of your legal drafting, and if you can take one or more of those and put them into practice, I think you will see the benefits in a fairly short amount of time. And on that note, I will see you next time.